Ms. Diane Gordon Harrison, National Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons for Jamaica and Chair of the Leadership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. Ms. Renee Petit, CMG, Speaker of the OECS Parliamentary Assembly and Vice Chair of the Leadership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition. Members of the Leadership Committee of the Caribbean Coalition, stakeholders in the anti-trafficking movement regionally, webinar panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to you all, and welcome to the final day of this webinar series addressing trafficking in persons in the Caribbean, progress towards 2030. I'm Adrian Alexander, Caribbean Regional Coordinator for Free the Slaves, which serves as the secretariat to the coalition. On behalf of Free the Slaves and the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons, I'd like to say Happy International Self-Care Day and an early Happy Judicial Wellbeing Day to stakeholders across the regional movement. Yesterday, Shakiah gave us a new approach to looking at sustainability of anti-trafficking coalitions and networks. She encouraged us to not only ensure that they are properly funded, but also that they take a people-centered approach where we collectively care for one another in the movement. We continue that trend with today's webinar titled Sustaining the Movement, Self-Care, Mental Health, and Burnout Prevention in Anti-Trafficking Work. Moderating this panel is Ms. Stacy-Ann Smith, a therapist and the founder of Pursued International Foundation in Jamaica. Stacy-Ann draws from her first-hand experiences with human trafficking in Indonesia, Vietnam, Jamaica, and the United States. She has effectively trained first responders, such as the Counter-Terrorism Unit of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, in combating human trafficking. On the panel are Ms. Greisy Gonzalez, Ms. Sandra Christie Brown, ASP Indirah Belle, and Ms. Shakiah Lewis. Greisy is a bilingual psychologist fluent in English and Spanish with 18 years of professional experience in the field of mental health and working with vulnerable groups, including survivors of trafficking. She has worked in Venezuela, Panama, and Trinidad and Tobago. She currently holds the position of Case Management Officer at the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Sandra, we're all familiar with. She's been doing an excellent job in keeping us well hydrated for our self-care sessions. But she's the founder of Finding Your Life Foundation, dedicated to promoting mental health and community well-being. She's developed education, community empowerment, and anti-trafficking initiatives in Florida and in Jamaica. In Jamaica, she started a wellness center, shoe closet initiative, and an annual back-to-school giveaway at the Marvelly Primary and Infant School in Kingston. Indirah serves as the chairperson for the Trafficking in Persons Inter-Ministry Committee for the Government of the Bahamas. As chair, she coordinates cross-sector collaboration among government agencies, international partners, and civil society organizations to strengthen the fundamental pillars of prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. Shakiah serves passionately as the Dean of the CARICOM Youth Ambassadors Corps and as a female youth ambassador for the Turks and Caicos Islands. Balancing education, advocacy, entrepreneurship, and service, Shakiah leads with intention as the leader of the Turks and Caicos Islands Civil Servants Association Young Workers Group. To get more information about our webinar series speakers, please download the webinar series brochure from the Coalition's website at ccatip.org. At this time, I hand you over to our moderator, Ms. Stacy-Ann Smith.
Thank you so much, Adrian, and welcome again to everyone this afternoon. It is the right place to be for Self-Care Day. We do so much work with our survivors, and we really want to take the time to ensure that we fill our cup so we can fill their cup. You agree? All right. So we're going to start out with Miss Gonzalez, who is going to be giving us the cultural perspective. As you heard from Adrian, she has done work across various islands in the Caribbean. And we want to hear from her from a clinical perspective. What is happening? What is this trauma? What is this burnout? Why do I feel so tired all of a sudden? Why do I feel so short with my family and friends and the persons I'm working with? Is their trauma affecting me, and how so? So I want you guys to have your pens ready or your iPads ready or your phones ready, whatever you have to get your notes that you can learn how to self-care, to understand what trauma is and how you can do the work so you can actually do the work. You get me? All right, let's welcome Miss Gonzalez.
Hello to everyone. Thanks for the invitation to participate in this very important webinar. So I'm going to discuss with you about how as responders against human trafficking could be affected in our mental health. We all know that this situation that survivors experience is highly traumatic, but sometimes we don't realize how traumatic could be with us, for us as well. So when we work against human trafficking, we are exposed to different stories principally, and continuous stories of abuse, exploitation, and injustice. When we hear this information, we can experience 3 syndromes that I'm going to mention just now, but I want to tell you that sometimes this environment could be frustrated as well, because sometimes we want to provide different services and we don't have them inside. And when we lack of these resources, that create a lot of frustration for us because we want and care the best for our survivors. So let's start with that. Is a reality that in not all the countries or regions, the survivors have access to all the services that they need. We want to do as much as we can. However, there's entities that are out of hand, and also we want justice and we sometimes don't find it. As we know, we have listened stories of abuse, exploitation, physically, emotionally, financially. We also know that even survivors who are rescued are just a small percentage of the ones that might be keeping in captivity still. And we have everything in our mind about that. So we also know that the volume of cases could be higher and higher every day, and we have to treat everyone that is appear to us. So I would like to talk about the stressors and to identify signs of how our mental health is affected by the work that we do. So I want to mention 3 syndromes that as first responders or advocates against human trafficking can experience. So we have burnout, compassion fatigue, and post-traumatic secondary stress disorder, okay? We always hear about PTSD, but what we don't know is that we can also experience PTSD or develop PTSD, not because we experience the exploitation or abuse in first person, but as a second person, we are exposed to these situations as listeners and as an active worker in direct contact with survivors. So let me talk about the most common and easy one, which is the burnout. Burnout comes when we are working with a big caseload, mostly when we don't have maybe too much spaces for debriefing, vents, and self-care. We can develop burnout because sometimes we want to help everyone because it's a life and a life is important to you. But in some point, we can experience tiredness, lack of concentration, feeling of negativity, difficulties to make decisions, problems with eating and sleeping. We can sleep and sometimes we wake up still tired. We lose interest on activities that we used to like. And so burnout is characterized with a big stage of tiredness and irritability. Of course, how we can work on the burnout. The first thing is identify that we have been experiencing that. The second part is accepting that there's so much that we can do. And also, we need to protect ourselves to be able to take care of others. Because what can happen is that we identify so much with the victim that we feel with our hands tied, and that creates a lot of frustration. And that frustration becomes tiredness and other syndromes. So that's why self-care is so important. So if we identify those symptoms, we can find places to discuss. I want to talk about how you can support your peers, and managers can support self-care for staff. And we can also discuss about compassion fatigue. So I want to say that compassion fatigue is something that can happen to anyone. It doesn't mean that we are not good people, that we don't have care about our victims, but it's a way to protect ourselves from trauma. So compassion fatigue is when you start to put yourself emotionally away or apart from the victim, because it's a way to protect your mental health. And you can see that with time, your level of empathy is reduced towards the victims or the survivors, as we want to call them. That affects the quality of service that you provide, that serve the sense of humanity that you have. But it's something that happens because it's a way for you to protect yourself as a first responder, as a worker related to against trafficking in persons. So when we experience that, we also have to reflect and think about why we are experiencing that. We also have to be conscious about the way that we start to provide our services. And maybe we have to step a little out for a short period of time, or you don't need to leave your work, but maybe put some time for you to go back and provide the best work that you can provide. This is very common in settings in which the volume of cases are very high, and you work as an automatic pilot. So you don't stop in each case anymore. For you, each case is just a case. So I want to give you an example. When, let's say, doctors say live, but when they see a body, most likely will be a body that they have to intervene, right? But maybe they don't think about that they have family, that they have friends, what they do, etc., because they need to focus on the action, direct action, because they don't have time to stop in that. And also that could affect the way that they do their job. So that can happen to us as well. And I think that the most sensitive situation with the compassion fatigue is that when we hear about principles of survivors, individualized care is very important, because each history in each person, even if they have been trafficked, it have a different background and different realities. So that's why we have to be conscious of that. It's not to be judged, but it's about to treat it. And I think in this case, psychological help, counseling, spaces to vent, help you to go back to that sense of humanity. And I want to mention another syndrome that is less common. It's a small percentage of the people, but it's very simple, that can happen to first responders and workers against human trafficking, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically secondary post-traumatic stress disorder, because it's secondary because it's happened to second person, no direct interaction. Okay, but if we have heard about post-traumatic stress disorder, we know that someone who have been mentally impacted by a situation of trauma that changed everything in their life. Persons with PTSD have flashback, which is memories about the incident, intrusive thoughts that could be things that they hear when they were in captivity, when they were exploited, a negative vision about the world, the others, themselves. It could happen like feelings of sadness and emptiness, difficulties for concentration, anxiety as well, physical symptoms such as headaches, stomach pain, chills, fever, etc. They are very like sensitive to sometimes be physically sick. And how can we experience that too is because when we are so exposed to the stories, we can start to relive those stories. I have heard from my colleagues, for example, that they go home and that story is repeated in their head constantly, what they hear. And then some of them start to have nightmares and dreams related to the work that they do related to those stories, and easily trigger, but small situations that could trigger the situation of trauma or the events that they have been aware of. So in this percentage of people who have developed post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically in second hand, this is necessarily be treated by a mental health professional because it's like a very sensitive mental illness case. That's why it's very important that where we work, we have employment assistance programs. Not all the organizations have it, but sometimes like organizations have a pool of volunteers that can provide that support. And in the organization, we can create groups to support each other. We can speak about peer support and management support. Peer support is when between your colleagues, you are able to provide that emotional support. We can be easily trained about peer support, developing active listening skills, and psychological first aid. When we talk about peer support, when we develop active listening, is when you talk to your colleague with no judgment, with words of encouragement, it will a lot of empathy towards what is happening. And also try to brainstorm solutions about how they can manage different situations, necessarily in a confidential way. That is why debriefing before intervention and after the intervention is very important, because we need to assess every person who is in our team feelings and experiences about of what is happening or what is going to happen related to their job, the work that they are doing. So in certain organizations, in a volunteer work, some of the members of the team could be trained to provide the support, and especially this can happen in settings that we don't have access full-time to therapies. So it's a kind of first-hand support to alleviate some suffering. So during the peer support session, we can help the person to vent and have an open hand that can feel supported and comfortable. When we speak about empathy, who better than your colleague to understand what you are experiencing? So that's why as teams, they should build a lot of trust among each other, that they can be able to be themselves and really express what is happening to them. I remember going to PTSD before, because I think it's an anecdote that I can share with you, just because I know that can happen firsthand. I remember that when I was working with my grandchildren, specifically 2018, when there was an influx of Venezuela coming to Trinidad and Tobago by boat. I was working with a big group of children across all the region of Trinidad and Tobago. And I remember that listening the stories, I went to Tobago and I went into a boat. And when I went into that boat, I started to have, that triggers me so many emotions. And I was remembering what happened and I got very afraid and nothing was happening to me. There was no danger, but it's how I was impacted for working firsthand with displaced persons, right? That's going back to PTSD. But in terms of peer support, there's actually manuals. The International Federation of Red Cross have their website in which they have a lot of manuals related to mental health. And they have one related to how to develop with a team or be part of a peer support team. So that is a recommendation that I can give you to make it part of your work and train staff for that. Management. In case of management, managers have to understand the impact that could have in mental health of the staff and promote activities of self-care. The activities of self-care have to be appropriate and is unique in each team because the team itself is the one who has to choose what kind of activities could be helpful for them to relax and to have that personal space away for job, taking a break from work a little bit. So in some organizations, for example, workers have mental health days. So managers provide that support. It could be that, for example, one day you wake up overwhelmed and you can say, I need to take a mental health day. Of course, with their boundaries, limitations, because I mean, if you work for organizations, of course, you're not going to have those days all the time. But that is a way to support the mental care and self-care of staff. Particularly in Children's Authority, we have that benefit because we deal with all the cases are abuse in all the ways possible. So we need those days. So managers can advocate for that. I know that because I worked like that before in other job experiences, that when you work sometimes as a consultant or as an independent contractor, you don't have rights for vacations or leave, right? I know that because I work for that, especially when you work with projects funding limited. Sometimes the staff don't have access to that. But at least in an internal arrangement, managers can provide those days for the staff to relax a little bit and go back to work. Because we have always heard about that if there's a plane accident, you have to put your mask first and then help the other person. So you have to keep that in mind, and managers who keep that in mind. And also it's a way to motivate staff to feel comfortable and supported. Because at the end of the day, the manager is the leader and is going to, the manager is the head, and everything, most of the decisions, the last word is from the manager. So that's why managers have to be aware and sensitive about the importance of self-care. So I just wanted to put out there. I know that some managers, they feel burnt out themselves. Sometimes they have over empathy, which is not good. We have to in certain levels of empathy, and they get so involved that they expect that the staff get that involved in things that they don't have a personal life, which is not good. So I'm just going to put that out there. And when you work, I want to talk about cross-cultural influence in self-care. So generally, when you work in international organizations, for example, that goes across, let's say, the Caribbean, you can encounter members of your team that have different nationalities, right? And they have different backgrounds in different stories. And sometimes, if you are not prepared in intercultural communication in which you accept all nationalities, belief, religions, political party, political positions, that could break or fragment the team. And that's why we need to be trained in some way in intercultural communication for the strength of the team. I want to talk about my experience with IOM. So in our in IOM, in the mental health division, that is including intercultural communication because they believe that is important, especially for the cooperation of different countries. And when you work in the humanitarian sector, it's very important that you are able to be very open to different beliefs, religions, and different political preferences. How do we do that in self-care? Well, give the opportunity to different members of the team to celebrate their own holidays. That is nice. Give the opportunity to share traditional meals, traditional food, traditional music, and have that space for everyone, because especially when you go in humanitarian missions, you can work away from your home, and that is a way to acknowledge everybody's culture and for them to feel welcome on that space where they can feel a sense of relation or feel related to what they belong. So my experience in Latin America will be that is Venezuela and Panama. The culture is kind of similar because it's Latin America. However, there's slight difference in the way that people is, in the way that in the traditions, etc. And there was a pool of humanitarian workers from different countries. And what we used to do is be aware of the important days for each country. And we used to celebrate and actually like congratulate the person for that important day for them. And in the Caribbean, the culture is different, definitely than Latin America, but with how the time passes, in my case, I have been learning those differences in cultures and in some way integrated in them. So what I mean is that there's enrichment in the possibility to work with different type of people. And we have to take that into consideration because it's another way for self-care. So with this, I want to leave the floor for the next presentation. And Stacy, the question goes to the end or no?
Yes, we will have all the questions at the end, unless anybody has a really burning question right now for you. I think we're gonna have our Q&A. We're gonna have our Q&A at the end of the segment after all presenters have shared. But thank you so much, Ms. Gonzalez, for sharing with us. I hope you guys were taking notes about compassion fatigue and secondary PTSD. I myself understand it completely. I remember getting to the point of feeling like I'm not exactly engaging with the woman I serve the way I used to. Like you said, I began to feel annoyed at some of the problems. And okay, I think it's time for me to take a break. So, guys, self-awareness is very important. It will help you guys to not only protect yourselves, but protect the very persons we are working with. We don't want to now re-traumatize the survivors that we work with because we are going through our own thing. So thank you so much, Miss Gonzalez. Thank you so very much. And we're going to jump right into another very unique perspective, guys. So we work with survivors, but sometimes these survivors become experts in them in themselves, and they begin to do the work that we are doing. And so I can imagine for a survivor what levels of burnout they experience, not only just being a survivor, but now helping other survivors. And so we're going to hear from Miss Sandra Christie Brown, who has founded Finding Your Light Foundation. She's here to shed some light on all of that. And so I want you guys to again pay keen attention. We're going to be asking questions afterwards. And I want you guys to have your own questions as well. So welcome you, Miss Sandra Christie Brown, to the stage.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez, for that wonderful presentation. I did took my notes. Thank you, Adrian, for the platform today, and thank you, Stacy-Ann, our luscious moderator. So glad to see you in the room again, and welcome everyone to our space. And congratulations to all the panelists who have gone on this week and have shared on this platform and the ones that are coming up to share. Well, my story. Well, let's see. For someone like me, living a lived experience, giving back provides an opportunity for myself to give back to others, benefit for self-care and mental health prevention. After discovering I was a survivor of HT, human trafficking, the acronym we use, I was devastated and I was so sad. I was at the height of my career in my business. And I said to myself, well, how will my first question was, how will my peers see me, right? And then my second question was, will they treat me indifferent? But now that I have identified and I'm wearing this honor badge of being a human trafficking survivor, the next question was, will I lose self-respect? Will I lose respect for myself? Meaning that, because human trafficking and people look at it like a scorn, right? So will I lose respect? So those are a few of my questions I pondered. So I had to make a decision and said to myself, Sandra, you cannot pour if you're empty. So after praying and asking God for guidance and seeking out a professional therapist, and after going to see the therapist, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I said to my therapist, well, being a former military wife, I thought this was only a badge that my fellow soldiers wore. If you've been through the war, you come out, shell shock, have PTSD, anxiety, and all that. And she said, no, anyone can have PTSD. It's from any kind of trauma you may experience. If you have lost a loved one, you can go through post-traumatic disorder. If you had a major accident or any kind of trauma, you can be diagnosed with PTSD. Well, the question was, now how do I manage it? So I myself, I love to research. So I went researching and trying to see how would I cope and how would I manage this PTSD. So after researching, I came across self-care. And I said, wow, this is interesting. All these years, I never thought about self-care. What is self-care? So I decided to dig real deep to find out how can self-care help your PTSD, help you with your mental wellness, right? So after I opened that book on self-care, my whole world lit up. Told myself, Lord, you have not given up on me, and I'm not going to give up on myself. Apart from my processing and going to see my therapist, I continue to put in God first and focusing on the well-being of children and women and survivors of all kind of trauma, domestic violence, child sexual abuse, human trafficking, all in one boat. We're all in one boat getting ready to go across this ocean. So, how did I start the organization Finding Your Light Foundation 2023 when I visited my school back in Jamaica, Marvelly Primary Infant School. Back then it was Marvelly All Age. And I got on the campus and saw the children running on the campus. Some had no shoes on, but they were happy. And look at the condition of the young girls who were among them, and seeing that at this point I need to make a decision where I can help them, that they wouldn't have to be sitting with a therapist at the age, I was 56 years old at that time, but how about having a space for them where they can speak with a counselor or a therapist and they can get the help they need? So that's how the Wellness Center came about. So in this Wellness Center, it was a fresh air to the community, not only to the children, because parents were coming in to get help. Mothers, daddies were coming in, getting counseling from that school, sitting on that couch in the Wellness Center. It was a valuable benefit, yes, to the community. And being proactive is so important, as I stated, to get the help you need. Also, I provided a shoe locker. Why? A student came to greet me when I came on the campus, and it's just a habit of mine. I always start looking down at the feet and on up. So I looked at the child's feet and saw the shoes was very torn, very, broken. I used the word shabby. My daughter said, don't use that word. That word is not a nice word. However, when I took the shoes off the child's feet, she looked at me and started crying because her shoes had 4 holes in the bottom of the shoes. I myself gave her a hug, and I had a suitcase then because I was delivering shoes, and I told her, go into the suitcase and find your size. And boy, she came back out with a big smile on her face. So that boosts her self-esteem. And she went skipping away, right, in her shoes. So those are some of the things that we do. When a child look at you and able to swap out something like a pair of shoes, and people may say, oh, that's not much, but to a child, that's a big deal. And I'm also grateful for the work that the foundation continued to do in Florida. In September coming up, we're going to have a Path 305 Miami, where we're going to teach the children how to speak, how to find their voice. And that is so important. Reason I didn't have a voice when I was a child, being a survivor of rape also, you lose your voice, right? So when I sat with my therapist and she was taking me through and she says, well, I noticed you need to learn how to be assertive. I said, well, how do I do that? And she went on and she coached me, and I had to go home, do homework, and situations came back to her. Oh yeah, and strides, making strides, you're making strides, right? So learning these skills are so important for your self-care also. Now, Finding Your Light Foundation, our vision is, I'm going to share what the vision is for the organization. Finding Your Light Foundation, our mission is to provide education, training and resources, referrals to promote mental health awareness. We utilize evidence-based and assistance program. Our foundation is dedicated in improving the lives of individuals who have experienced childhood trauma, PTSD, and mental health challenges. For someone like myself, I am so happy to be in this space. Reason B is that I am fearfully and wonderfully made by God. I have to remind myself every day with that. For my self-care each day, I try to be mindful, live in the moment. Things that I cannot control, I do not try to keep them in my mind. I let it go because it's out of my control. So those are two of the things I practice. Praying also and doing my daily devotions, eating healthy, getting enough sleep, at least 8 hours a day, have helped me along my journey. And also being a part of the Survivors Network. Now, let me share something with you about the Survivors Network, which is so, so important. If I had left this platform and didn't share that with you, wouldn't be any justice to what we're doing. In that space, we recognize and empower our fellow survivors. We do understand we all are unique and we are all on different levels towards our healing. So what we do, we continue to trust God. As we go through this process, we have to continue to encourage each other. I know Shamira McKenzie is one of my partner in that space with me, and we're so grateful for her and so many others who are in that group with us. When I came to Free the Slaves, that was my first request when I met Adrian. I said, we need our own space where the survivors can thrive and they all can become survivor leaders one day in wherever they're serving, in Jamaica, in Trinidad, in Kenya, wherever they are, they can become leaders. But it takes work. You have to put the work in. And sometimes I have to call Adrian and say, Adrian, this journey, this is rough. I remember going to the Survivors Conference in Global Conference back in 2020, I think it was 2023 or 2024, 2023. And the room filled with survivors and it was emotions in the room. And I had to understand that this is just the residue of what they have gone through. So we have to learn how to be kind to ourselves, be patient with ourselves, and to love on ourselves, right? So each day, what I'm going to leave with you is to be kind with yourself. If you have not met the goals where you are right now in life, you said, oh, I should have been far on, it's okay, right? And always remember, it's okay to not to be okay, right? And if you need to seek professional help, please reach out and get the help you need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miss Brown. Be kind to yourselves. If I could hear you guys speak, I would say speak out, be kind to yourself. And I'm going to ask you to type in the chat, be kind to yourselves. So many of us can think of all the critical things that we're not doing well or not doing well enough. There's something I'm lacking, but take a break and just be kind to yourself. You know, you being here is also you being kind to yourself. Plugging in and getting the support you need so that you can be the support that our survivors need. So now we're going to jump into a time of hearing from the young people. Yes, thank you, Adrian. Be kind to yourself. That's right. Hope other persons are typing, be kind to yourselves. So we're going to hear from the youth perspective, for us to do the work. A lot of the survivors that we end up meeting, even with the work I do, they got exposed to this issue at a very young age. And there are so many young persons now who are trying to change the tide and get involved and be on the front end of what's going on. So we're going to hear this report from Shakiah Lewis, and she is a woman of many talents. She is presently being trained at a conference, but she is taking the time to be a part of this very important discussion. So let's welcome Shakiah Lewis. Thank you, Candice, for typing "be kind to yourself." Thank you for the gentleman before, "be kind to yourself." All right, Shakiah Lewis, you're on.
Hi. I hope
Hi,
everyone can
hi.
hear me. I must
Yes, we
apologize.
can.
Like you said, I am at a CPSA conference, so I'm actually doing some more work with young people across the Caribbean region. I'm in Grenada right now, but it is a privilege to join you guys today just to reflect on one of the most important issues affecting our generation, the mental health and well-being of Caribbean children and young people. Now, CARICOM and UNICEF, the CARICOM Child and Youth Mental Health Research Study, gives us more than just statistics. It gives us a voice. It gives us the story of over 1,500 children and young people from all across 17 Caribbean countries and territories who share the same lived experiences. Now, their responses remind us while many young people appear to be coping on the outside, many are struggling silently on the inside. So, this report really tells us about the challenges in mental health among Caribbean children. And it tells us how much is increasing. So, with 1 in 5 experiencing symptoms of mental health conditions, many need additional support to cope with daily life at home, schools, their communities, and yet available services often cannot meet growing demands. This report kind of highlights the need for stronger research. It highlights the need for resources, the need for the programs to promote resilience, strengthen coping skills, and basically to ensure young people receive mental health support that they need. So, one of the strongest messages I believe from the report is that mental health is not just about treating the illness. It's more about preserving ourselves before we reach a crisis. So, even just thinking about that being the message, the stats behind what we found out in the report is just sobering. Like 58% of young people said that they do not feel optimistic about the future. 56% reported that they worry too much about different things. 54% said that they fell down and they just felt depressed or hopeless. And even more concerning, 77% said anxiety made them somewhat or very difficult to manage work, home responsibilities, or even relationships. So I guess perhaps one of the most alarming findings was that 29% of the respondents from our report reported that they had frequent thoughts of being better off dead or hurting themselves. Now, these are not just numbers. Think of these as the percentage of students sitting in a classroom, or the percentage of young people at their jobs sitting at their desk, or even the amount of young people in our communities even participating in this forum today, if we have them. So I guess this is why we must start talking intentionally about self-care and self-preservation. So this report encourages young people to keep pushing through exhaustion, through stress, and emotional pain to celebrate productivity. So we applaud resilience, but sometimes we ignore the emotional cost of constantly having to be resilient. So one thing I want people to remember on this forum is that self-preservation is not selfish. It means recognizing that we need to take a pause. It means protecting your peace. It means setting healthy boundaries. It means seeking health without shame and understanding that taking care of our mental health is just as important as taking care of our physical health. So when we preserve ourselves, we're better able to contribute to our families, our workplace, our communities, and to our country. So equally important in this report emphasizes on mental health and the psychosocial support, or MHPSS. Now, the psychosocial support is about counseling. It is more about creating the environment where young people feel safe, connected, heard, and supported. It strengthens emotional resilience, encourages healthy relationships, and it reduces stigma and helps young people or individuals develop the coping skills they need to navigate life's changes. Now, unfortunately, many young people still lack this support system. So the report found that 54% of respondents did not believe that they had a trusted person that they could turn to when experiencing mental health challenges. While the other 68% had never visited a counselor, despite recognizing the value of the professional support. So this just highlights the need to strengthen not only mental health services, but also the social networks that surround young people. And as we move forward with awareness and actions, the report provides several important recommendations. So first, we must continue raising awareness about mental health, anxiety, depression, emotional well-being. These are things we have to constantly be talking about. Second, we must intentionally promote self-care, healthy coping strategies, and self-preservation and emotional well-being. So, most importantly, this work cannot be done in isolation. So, we have to work along with governments, schools, healthcare services, youth organizations, Caribbean communities, CARICOM institutions, UNICEF, civil societies, and the private sector, I believe, must work alongside one another to strengthen responsiveness. Collaboration across all sectors will ensure that young people receive a timely support, effective referrals, and services that truly meets their needs. So the future of the Caribbean, I believe, depends not only on how we educate our young people, but more on how healthy, how supported, and how emotionally resilient they are. So, if over half of our youth are struggling with anxiety, hopelessness, or a lack of support, then mental health is no longer simply a health issue. It is a development issue, an emotional issue, an educational issue, an economic issue that ultimately turns it into a human rights issue. So, bringing this discussion to a close, and I was so happy I heard this statement from a few other people. We cannot pour from an empty cup. And it's crazy that my presentation kind of aligned with that, because definitely I 100% wholeheartedly believe that if your cup is empty, there's nothing to pour out of it. So, those of us who are working in anti-trafficking carry stories of trauma, exploitation, and injustice every day. We advocate for survivors, we respond to crisis, and fight tirelessly to protect the vulnerable. But in doing so, we must also remember that our own mental health matters. Sustaining this movement means, I guess, sustaining the people who make the movement possible. Burnout does not happen overnight. It develops when we ignore stress, when we suppress emotions, and continually place the needs of others ahead of our own. So that's why I believe that self-care is not a luxury, it's a professional responsibility. Self-preservation is not about stepping away from the work. It is about ensuring that we can continue to work with compassion, clarity, and resilience. So finally, sustaining this movement requires collaboration with government, civil organizations, law enforcement, international partners. We must continue to work alongside one another to strengthen responsiveness, to ensure that both survivors and those who serve to have time to access holistic mental health support. If we truly want to put an end to these things we're talking about, we must build a movement that not only rescues lives, but those who protect the well-being of those who are committed to the fight. So I guess I don't want us to leave here without thinking about having a renewed commitment to making self-care a priority, to normalizing conversations about mental health, to investing in psychosocial support, and to look after one another with the same compassion we extend to survivors. Because when we care for ourselves, we strengthen our ability to care for others, and we preserve the well-being of those on the front line. We ensure that this movement is not only impactful, but it's sustainable. Thank you.
Listen, I can see why you are the Dean of the CARICOM Youth Ambassador Corps, Shakiah Lewis. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. Shakiah is the World Cup, you know, Shakira is on my mind. Shakiah Lewis, you do today. It's been a pleasure to see what you did. And I am looking forward to even asking you questions, you know. I think about what you said earlier. If you saw my hand, I was typing. You said that self-care is a luxury. It's about ensuring we are able to continue the work with clarity and resilience. I love that point. I was typing away as you were talking. I wasn't texting as I was like, get your notes in, girl, get your notes in. You know, thank you so much. Thank you to all our presenters this afternoon. I'm going to open the floor for some Q&A right now. I have a few to start us off, and then I'm going to ask Adrian to field any questions that we get so that I can be able to ask it to the panelists this afternoon. Okay, you can just shout them out when you're ready. So I'm going to
Sure.
start us off. For the three of you who work in various capacities, how do you know when it's time to step back rather than push through? Anybody can answer. How do you know for yourself when it's time to step back rather than push through?
I think that when you have like an start to have a negative vision about the world, the others, and yourself, is
Mm-hmm.
when you just have to realize that something is happening to you. If you see that everything in the world is going bad, I think you have to step out, because that will
Okay.
affect your the way that you feel about yourself and the way that you feel about others.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else wants to chime in?
Thank you, Stacy-Ann. I think with myself, it's a different light because I'm my own boss. I make my own schedule. So
Mm-hmm.
Monday's always my day when it's just, other than, on Saturday, keeping the Sabbath and I'm resting. And
Mm-hmm.
so Monday, I go over into a day where I am, just my day to go get a massage or do something for me. In the
Mm-hmm.
work now, when I have things scheduled, like I have the book bag giveaway coming up on the 10th in Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
I started from June planning. So when I plan
Mm-hmm.
and pace myself, right? So when I pace myself, I find out I do better. When I get two things about me, if my mom will tell you if she doesn't get enough rest, she is not the best person, to be in the room with because I'm just all over the place. I can't focus. And if
Mm-hmm.
I don't get enough rest and proper planning. So once I put those together, get my rest and do proper planning, pacing myself, you know, scheduling and, I don't double schedule clients, but I have to see clients. I don't double book. If a client's canceled, that's it. No one is here to fill that spot. I use that spot for myself to do something that I want to do. So it's pacing yourself and prioritizing how you're going to work. Now, if you're on a job 9 to 5, you have to come up with your own, thing that what works for you. What works for me may not work for you. So you have to try to figure out how is it after work, before I get home, am I going to take some time and get a breather? I remember my grandmother used to get home after a hectic day and she used to say, I'm going to take a 5. At 10 years old, what is a 5? Didn't understood. She went in the room, and a 5 looked like 20 minutes. We're waiting on dinner. Where is she, right? But she was decompressing, right? So take time to decompress.
So notice how you're being at work, if you're being a little bit shorter than normal, and also taking breaks to help yourself. Are there any questions in the chat before I go to our next question, Adrian? Can you ask it for us, please?
Yes. Candice has asked, what structures, policies, or support systems need to be in place in Caribbean organizations to prevent burnout and vicarious trauma in anti-trafficking teams? Great question. I think Greisy was
Great
pointing to some of
question.
that earlier. Yeah, she could probably
Yes.
elaborate a little bit. Greisy,
Yes, please.
the question was, what structures, policies, or support systems need to be in place in Caribbean organizations to prevent burnout and vicarious trauma in anti-trafficking teams?
Yeah, well, I think some organizations create different groups where they promote a healthy lifestyle. For example, activities related to arts, to do sports. Also, I think it's very important to have different gatherings outside of work so the colleagues can get to know each other beyond what is their role in the organization as a person to build that trust. And I think that, as I said, the HR policy should be taking into consideration that there's different type of roles, and there's not the needs of some are not the same of the needs of others. I wanted to add again, right? There was questions before, but I want to add that I didn't mention about the substance abuse. So one of the negative coping mechanism is the use of substances. So that I think is a coping mechanism that have to be addressed by the first responder and the advocate against human trafficking. I just wanted to add that because we asked about when do you know that you have to step out for a little bit. So I want to add that.
Thank you so much. So being aware of negative coping mechanisms or even overutilization of what are more acceptable coping mechanisms, but can be also being overly used, social media, etc. And I remember earlier you mentioned, developing persons on the team who can do psychological first aid or teaching persons to actively listen, the active listening skills. And I would say for the question as well, I think a very important thing is that persons can't necessarily afford therapeutic support. So having employee assistance programs where organizations are either partially funding or in some way supporting their staff getting therapeutic support, I think is a very good thing that companies can put in place to help their staff. I read a book of a gentleman who was on the front lines doing the more investigative work, like actually going and doing stings. And when he came back home, he had what you experienced, no longer interested in life, not really engaging with his wife like he used to, until eventually, unfortunately, he actually participated in the services of one of the people he was investigating, one of the women, his age, but still, problematic. And so if we're not, and his big complaint was there was no debriefing, there was no support. So we really have to get these policies in place in our companies to help ensuring our team members and frontline workers are not being left to fend for themselves and then dying on the battlefield. So thank you so much for that. So I'm going to hand over back to our host, Adrian. We've had a very great conversation today, and we have gotten some interesting insights from multiple levels. And we are so glad you were able to be a part of this webinar. It's been a week of amazing topics, and I hope today wasn't the only day you were present. So happy Self-Care Day, and I'm handing back over to you, Adrian.
Thank you so much, Stacy-Ann. Kudos to you and your brilliant panelists. We did miss the input of one individual, ASP Indirah Belle from the Bahamas. She had an emergency with on her job, so She's been trying to join, but it seems that she's getting some difficulties joining from her mobile. If she does succeed, we can probably take her intervention, Stacy-Ann. In the interim, I can probably ask for, well, all of our audience to just send some sort of emoji congratulating Stacy-Ann and her panelists on a job very well done. I just want to express thanks to all of our moderators and panelists throughout the week, especially our survivors and our youth advocates such as Shakiah and Richard and Judy, who shared so beautifully with us earlier in the week. I also want to thank Carla. Carla is our Haitian Creole translator. She did a great job connecting Stefania, one of our survivors from Haiti, and also our Free to Slave staff, Sering and Brian, for all of their wonderful work to set up the webinar interface and to keep everything running smoothly. So Brian is with us today, and I've asked him to share a poll. So that will come up on your screens just about now. And that poll will allow us to know which topics on the webinar series were most meaningful for you. And if you'd like to receive further education on specific topics, we can do follow-up webinars or podcast interviews with some of the panelists, since the time on a webinar is fairly short for each panelist. So we can do podcast interviews so that they have a lot more time to have the discussions. And then you could always send in your questions so that we can pose it to them in advance. So the poll should be on your screen. Please complete it. Following the webinar, we will send a thank you email to all who registered for the series but may not be here today, and it will include those questions as an evaluation survey. Later this month, we're hoping for World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. God willing, we'll send everyone the report of the webinar series and an updated brochure with presentations from the speakers once they're available to us, to key documents mentioned during the meeting, and to links to each day's recording. The Coalition's website is where you can find a lot more information about our activities and links to our social media accounts, and that's ccatip.org, ccatip.org. Just popped it there for everyone who may need to see it. And of course, the recordings from the webinar series will also be on our YouTube channel, so you can always visit and see what's there right now. We have our Member Spotlight podcast, and that reminds me, Stacy-Ann, we have a podcast interview to do with you for that, right?
Yes.
And we also have our Caribbean Connections podcast, where we interview stakeholders who are not members of the coalition, but whose work intersects with the work that we do in terms of combating trafficking. We're not only on social media, we also have a monthly segment on WeFM Grenada at 10:45 a.m. every last Thursday of the month, which incidentally this month will be on World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. So you can join Cherise Francis and myself as we host that program, and we'll have the honor of speaking with Judy Sango from Youth with Disabilities Connections next week for our July segment. So I am not yet seeing Indirah joining us. She was experiencing some challenges, as I mentioned.
She is here. She is here.
Oh, she is. Okay, great.
Yes, she is.
Yes, I see
No
her name
video
now.
yet, but definitely I'm seeing her name.
Yeah, I think she's probably behind the wheel of a vehicle, so that may be a challenge. So, Stacy-Ann, would you yield to Indirah to share with us?
Yes, yes. Miss Belle, are you with us?
Indirah, if you can unmute and let us know that you're hearing us, please. Okay, just sent her
Maybe it's
a
not
WhatsApp
working.
message.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Maybe you can
Just
have
like
her on your podcast and we get to hear from her on that day.
most definitely. We
It's a
have
great
our Caribbean
idea.
Connections interview lined up
Oh,
already with Indirah. Indirah, there you
yes,
are.
yes, yes, finally.
Finally.
Yes,
Amen.
finally.
There you
Mhm.
go.
So
See?
Welcome, welcome. If you could give us 5 or 10 minutes to share from your perspective how faith and track the task force have come together to help you to address the issue of self-care, mental health, and burnout. We would love to hear from it. And we have some attendees still here, still hanging on, still ready. So just jump right in so we can be able to learn and grow as professionals in the self-care, in working with survivors.
and doing the work that I do. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Sorry about the delay in joining, but as Stacy-Ann indicated, I am the trafficking in person chairperson. So it's a broad range of things that I do that involves the coordination of trafficking efforts in the Bahamas, which include prevention, protection of the victims identified, and also prosecution in terms of making sure that they attend courts and provide their evidence. And of course, after protection is partnerships. So from I became the chairperson, um, the Bahamas subscribed to being a Christian nation. And so there was always a tip chaplain on the team that specifically prayed for members of the task force. And I also find myself, bonding with her because it is God works that we do. And it could be very stressful because a lot of times the resources, whether it be human or otherwise, it's not always available readily. And so those kinds of things could be very stressful. And also the demand of having to switch roles periodically. I'm a police officer, but at this time I'm working, like I said, substantively from our Ministry of National Security, which is more not direct it with investigations, but it involves a coordination of efforts. So you do work with the investigators, the prosecutors, and it's just, it's a comprehensive approach to the crime. So you end up working with everyone. Today, I had to assist with my social worker bringing some victims for medical care. So one had experienced some crisis, and so it's sometimes the work that you do. It's very, like I said, it changes fast, and it's very intense. And actually, from the time that I was um, received the job opportunity, I resorted to my faith, and I asked God when I pray, because I do pray a lot. I mean, that's the basis of how I sustain to get wisdom. When you get overwhelmed, I, I pray, I pray. So I asked God, I said, Lord, why me? Because I didn't know that I was actually gonna get this position. So I said, so things that he said to me was to take care of the victims. And of course, we don't have a dedicated shelter. At this time, we use a variety of different facilities, but that is something, whether I'm part of the task force or have other duties, I would definitely assist because, you know, with this work, survivors of trafficking and those who are identified need comprehensive care, and sometimes, that they leave situations with the clothes on their back. So you need a place where they could receive, comprehensive programming, working with them. There's the psychological care I find that to be very necessary. So definitely, that is something big that I do in terms of working with Ministry of Health and Ministry of Health and our outpatient section called community counseling and assessment. And so, it's a lot of times they come in with adverse childhood experiences, which cause them to be a little bit more vulnerable. Um, and that's one of the reasons why they end up being victims of trafficking. So that's a big, and then I had opportunities too where you have to go to court with the social worker and the victim, and they're nervous, they're frightened, and so sometimes you have to pray, with their permission, of course. So that's another way that you work with these clients, and you depend on your faith to sustain you and to assist you with being productive with what you do. And so and then too, like I said, because it's demanding, sometimes as a police officer, you have to. When it's a caring role, compassion is something that you have to exercise, and so so that helps to because really and truly, when you look at it, it's a mix of doing God's work, you know, when you look at it, because you're supposed to look out for the persons who are oppressed, and find themselves in situation like trafficking. So it just provides foundation, in terms of how you live and how you should treat other human beings.
Oh, it seems that we may have lost Indirah. Yeah.
It's kind of
Let me
hard.
just see if she's able to get back on. But I know
Okay.
she was mentioning the other day that one of the activities that they have scheduled for tomorrow, God willing, actually, as the interministry task force is a prayer breakfast. And they've been doing
Yes.
this for the past few years,
Hmm.
where the survivors, the law enforcement officers, the social workers, the different government representatives on the task force get together and spend that time encouraging one another, um, interceding for the system of justice in the country and so forth. We were trying
Hmm.
to make a connection with the Bahamas chapter of the Caribbean Association of Women Judges.
Hmm.
As I mentioned in the intro, tomorrow, God willing, is International Judicial Well-Being Day. It's the second year it's being observed under the United Nations. And you really see the intersection, because what happens with stakeholders across the four Ps is extremely
Hmm.
important in their personal lives. So if you are dealing with stress, and you mentioned the um, secondary trauma, if you're dealing with PTSD, if you just have a
Hmm.
heavy workload and too limited hours or persons to get the work done, it impacts how you show up, even
Hmm.
as judges, and that's one of the areas
Yes.
where we have to look at corruption. If you're not showing up the right way as a law enforcement officer, as a judicial officer, um, as a social worker, if you're using substances, as Greisy mentioned, that can lead into so many different directions of indebtedness, of addiction, where literally someone can exploit your weakness and have you engage in corrupt practices to
Hmm.
facilitate trafficking, even to deny access to justice to survivors of trafficking, to rule in such a way that those who are prosecuting trafficking cases cannot succeed because you have been compromised. And the prevention for that could simply have been to take better care of yourself so that your family life is not adversely impacted, so that your physical health is not adversely impacted, because all of those things affect how you show up to do your job. And if you're not showing up in the right way, it means that survivors don't have the best of you that they deserve, that they
Yes.
deserve. So there's a lot of intersection. I love the fact that globally, we're observing these things. International Self-Care Day, International Self-Care Month from the 24th of June to the 24th of July, and now Judicial Well-Being Day. It shows that we had overlooked a lot of things that were happening with people. Sometimes you just don't see somebody anymore in a particular space. They're not attending certain niche meetings and task force meetings, and it's simply because they're having a difficult experience in terms of continuing to cope. So as Shamir reminded us yesterday, if you're thinking about how we as a movement, as networks and coalitions show up, and for sustainability of those, is not just about the funding. It's also about how we invest in one another, how we care for one another, how we check in to see if our colleague is doing well, and how we lend that type of support. Yeah. Over to
Absolutely.
you.
Well,
So I'm not seeing
that
the
was,
meeting.
yeah.
But I guess at
Well,
this point
we
we can
thank you
hand
guys
over
for
to
being, yes,
Sandra, yeah, for the self-care session. This will be our
self-care
final
session. Yes,
self-care session
yes.
for the webinar series. So Sandra, take it away.
All righty, ready. Wow, it's a lot of information, and wow, what a journey. So the first thing, if we're sitting down, we want to stand. I know I've been sitting down for a minute there, so we're going to stand and do our stretch, right? Lean to the right, we're going to stretch. Hold it to the left, and hold it. We're going to go forward, up. All right, now we can get back in our seats. Oh, slowly. Alrighty. So here we are. Happy International Self-Care Day. It is July the 24th, and we have came to basically the end of a wonderful week of our webinar. And we do want to say self-care, we're ending with self-care. We started with self-care at the end, and we're ending with self-care, right? So at this time, I'm going to go into some tips for you. And we heard that word burned out. We heard that word burned out all day. Burned out. All right. So I see Mr. Baker is there also on our platform. I want to thank him for taking the time out, and other folks who have taken the time out to join us today. Thank y'all for your support. Quiet burned out. Take time to recharge. Sometimes burnout develops simply because someone has been carrying a lot for a long time. Aren't we guilty of that sometimes? Without enough space to rest, process, or get the support that's needed. You have to know the signs when you're being burned out and address them. Do not ignore them, right? I may give you self-care tips here today. However, the tips that I'm giving you are for educational purposes. So you should seek professional advice and move accordingly, right? So now we're going to start off. The first tip is your soft goals. Set and achieve intentions like sleep a bit better. Be kinder. Here we are again. Be kinder to yourself, right? And make space in the if you're on social media all the time, that's not going to work with your self-care, right? So we have to take a break from social media sometimes. Remember, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that's something to think about. Emotional check-in. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? We're doing do an emotional check-in. Naming your emotion can lower their intensity. Okay. And number 3, let go of what you can control, right? Many of us have adult children, or we may have different situation, adult family members. we cannot control them, right? So we have to let go of what we can't control. Some things we just gotta pray about it and leave it alone. Number 4, stay connected with supportive people. And as I close, I can say I'm so grateful for the space that I'm in, a safe space that we can grow as survivors and we can get the help we need. We're only a phone call away. We can always call, and we can also reach out to people who are our supporters. Form a group of supporters, right? So you're going to find a lifeline partner, someone who's going to hold you accountable and say to you, did you journal today? Did you take time for yourself today? Were you being kind to yourself today? Right? So find your homework, and I'm going to leave a charge, is to find an accountability partner. Self-care accountability partner. Self-care accountability partner. Right, Stacy-Ann? Yes. So that person will remind us that we need to do our self-care, not weekly, but daily. That's all I have for you. Happy Self-Care Day.
And
Thank
same to
you.
you. Same to you. Handing back over to you, Adrian, as we close up for our closing remarks.
Sure. Thanks so much. I encourage people, if you're working in any of the 4 Ps, prevention, protection, prosecution, partnership, and I'm told that policy is also widely accepted as a 5th P, please do a quick self-assessment. There's an anonymous self-care survey that we have. Our research senior program manager for research is actually doing that. So just want to encourage people to maybe just put that link up on the screen. Here it is. Yeah. Again, anonymous, you're working in any of the 5 Ps, just click on it, and that helps us understand what's happening in our region. There's similar research taking place in other regions of the world among those involved in anti-trafficking activities, right? So do a quick click, save that, and then you can fill it in at your leisure. So thanks so very much to everyone who attended throughout the week. I see some names showed up on every single day. So thank you so much for your dedication to learning and to finding out more about what is happening in the anti-trafficking movement here in our region. So as I said, you'll be receiving an email pretty soon, and you will be able to access the resources of the report as well as the post-webinar brochure with links to all of the resources that would have been shared during the week. So have a wonderful weekend. Continue to enjoy the remainder of International Self-Care Day and continue taking good care of yourselves. All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.